US senators have accused the biggest social media companies of failing to protect children from threats of sexual predation on their platforms. Most senators have been labelled as having blood on their hands for pushing for profit over the mental health of users. Joining us is a cyber law and internet governance expert, Zanyiwe Nthatisi-Asare, CEO of Digitally Legal. Thanks so much for speaking to us. Now, in response to Senator Lindsey Graham's statement that tech CEOs have blood on their hands, what specific legislative measures are being proposed or discussed to hold social medias accountable for child safety issues? And is this a fair statement?
So first, I just need to make a correction. I'm no longer CEO of Digitally Legal, so I'm speaking in my capacity as a cyber lawyer and an internet governance expert. Now, to answer your question, what are they proposing? So they're proposing online safety specific regulations and really more stricter adherence by these big tech giants. So if we've seen in the past, a tech company will go in, they'll have some kind of litigation, whether that's in the EU being summoned or in the US, and it's almost like a little smack on the hand, and then about a month later there's a similar issue coming up. So the real problem that we're dealing with here is the issue of stonewalling, and irrespective of whatever law that the Senate and the government of the US is trying to put together, the real question here is, would it be applicable, effective, and will these tech giants actually listen?
Now, one CEO in particular is Mark Zuckerberg, and how has he responded to accusations of prioritizing profit over the safety of children?
So, if you follow the case, his initial stance was, we're doing the best, we're doing everything we can. And this time around, the Senate was really not having it. They were not hearing him saying that his best is good enough. And one of the questions that's actually thrown at Mark Zuckerberg is, like you said, with the blood on their hands, is he happy that he's got blood on his hands? And does he believe that he owes his families apologies? So, if you look at his body language and you look at his response, he's not necessarily trying to say yes from the very beginning. But with all these pictures in this room, and people's children who've actually passed away from the actual ramifications of social media abuse, he stood up and he actually said sorry to the people. So, from his words, he seemed sorry, but the question that was thrown at him is, are you willing to compensate these families? Do you see something wrong? And that was a bit of a murky answer from my perspective, what I saw.
So, obviously, he's accused of some liability, or I suppose given the option to take liability for those that have passed. But let's talk about identifying the perpetrators as a result of whatever infringements. How easy is it to nab the perpetrators?
So the power really falls in the hand of these social media platforms. I think on some engagements we've had with the channel earlier last year and the year before, one of the really nice or cool things that we established in South Africa is a piece of, or rather section of the legislation that can summon social media companies to work alongside the police through the Cybercrimes Act to compel them to give certain information in cases. Now, when we look at the US's scenario, we can see that there are a lot of perpetrators, and we see that even just through this, the Senate's questions, Mark Zuckerberg and Meta, and I guess the rest of the social media companies, were not willing to give that kind of information. So that really speaks to not just mechanisms existing, but a requirement to ensure that data for perpetrators, when simple examples. There's a question that was asked about why platforms allow child pornography, and why, outside of just allowing them to be uploaded, why do they allow people to view them after showing a warning sign? So you get an option to say, do you need assistance or help? So help, therapy, whatever it may be, to assist you with a potential addiction or wanting this illegal or illicit data or content. And number two, then it actually says, do you still want to proceed and view this? And that was seen as very problematic, and I think anybody can agree with that. So already you can see there's an element of protection by some of these social media platforms for the perpetrators.
Now, Zanyiwe, a video played during the hearing featured children sharing their experiences of being victimized on social media. What are the key concerns raised by these children, and how are lawmakers proposing to mitigate the impact of social media on the well-being of minors?
So one that, we've been accustomed to throwing around a term, cyberbullying, sexploitation, looking at the utilization of deep fakes, so children being embarrassed because, images of their faces are attached to bodies depicting sexual acts or of the sexual nature. So those are things that have really pushed people to harm themselves, to have horrible, real, physical world experiences. And these are things that have been reported, but, to what extent? If it, gets stopped with one person, then the next person does it. And a lot of the times when we have these conversations, there's this massive disconnect between the physical world and the online world. And I'd like us to go back to, when we speak about emerging technologies. So, for instance, deep fakes, artificial intelligence being deployed on these platforms. Do we have sufficient regulations? Do we even know how they work? Do we know what to do to curtail them? I don't really think so. I don't think our lawmakers, both here and abroad, I wouldn't say are investing, but maybe are not deploying people with a sophisticated enough knowledge base to assist them in curbing these kind of things.
Now, there was a story that we were following a few weeks ago, and it's a story in which the police in the UK were at the time investigating a virtual rape in the metaverse involving a young girl under the age of 16 who was sexually attacked by a gang of adult men in an immersive video. Is it some of the stuff that the US lawmakers are looking to safeguard and deal with?
So there's been a massive, set of conversations had in the US, but also in the intergovernance community under the United Nations, where people really gather, whether it's legal practitioners, ICT experts who are really looking at that. So you can't speak about social media platforms without speaking about the sex industry. Because if you think about it, deep fakes, if you think about this virtual rape, that's a sex-related issue. And if you look at that, that's rape. It's, you're depicting, you are promoting statutory rape. So those are things that we need to start really looking at from a tech law perspective and starting to incorporate what we have from a traditional perspective and seeing what kind of penalties could apply, So our regulatory frameworks need to really be more expansive, because when we say that, there's no distinction between the cyberspace and the physical world, it's becoming more and more real. When someone says their money got stolen, nowadays it's not physical money. You're speaking about a cyber crime, a cyber fraud. So we really need to be cognizant of that fact.
Now, during the hearing, I think going back to the conversation we're having, internal emails were displayed showing Mark Zuckerberg rejecting a request to hire more engineers for safety improvements. I mean, how do CEOs justify such decisions? And what changes, if any, are they willing to make in their internal policies to enhance safety? It almost suggests that they don't particularly care.
So, I mean, if you're, in the tech community, there's like a typical tech bro type of approach to life where, you're just trying to do the tech, trying to build tech. And sometimes people can be forgotten in the process. Now, when you say that, why are you not hiring more engineers? Why are you not deploying these people to ensure that you're creating a safer environment? That is something that is now making us realize that these tech companies started as startups where, there wasn't a lot of scrutiny. And now they grew into big tech giants where, you're looking at them as tech and you're saying, the CEO of a company. But if you really dig deeper, the question here is, are they really just companies, or are they people or people behind entities that have similar power to governments now? I mean, if you think about it, they control so much. If you look at communication as a basic right, a basic human right, they are behind all of that. They determine how we use their platforms, what we are exposed to, etc. And we now need to start looking at them with a different lens. They're not just tech companies. These are people that have a real impact on real life, and maybe governments need to start looking at collaborations at an international level with different governments and tech companies.
So let's look at what role that can we play as obviously some of the victims and the consumers who are largely impacted by this. So if it was an individual, then issues around cancel culture would apply. But how do we have the power or capacity to start using certain social media platforms, for instance, or just what social aspects can we include or activate in order to put some pressure on, whether it's Twitter or any of the other social media?
I absolutely appreciate that question. And, we've been having workshops speaking about that, cancel culture being one of them, but looking at it from a social media perspective. So if we're equating the cyberspace to the physical world, let's look at something simple, like real estate. There's certain areas where people say you don't go there, you don't invest there, you just don't want to be there after a certain time at night. If we start empowering ourselves and and we start categorizing social media platforms in that way, where we say, well, do you really want to be associated with a place like that? Where, let's say, in the physical world, it'd be like there are crimes that happen, drugs are being sold, etc. In this instance, we need to start sensitizing ourselves to saying, if we support these social media platforms, we're actually supporting sex trafficking, child pornography, kidnapping, murders. And we need to start looking at it from that perspective. But that takes a lot of literacy and understanding the mechanisms behind social media platforms, what their purposes are, and sort of repurposing what our relationships are with social media platforms. We do understand that, there's an element of a conversation around, censorship and saying, well, if you cancel a certain social media platform, you're limiting communication. But now we need to understand that what are we actually promoting by utilizing these platforms? So I love that idea, and I think that's definitely something we might actually incorporate in the way that you've coined, to say, how do we ensure that us as people start cancelling things that are not good for us and not serving the greater good?
Absolutely incredible conversation. Zanyiwe Nthatisi-Asare is a cyber law and internet governance expert.